The first sign was the silence. Not the heavy kind you get before a storm, or the reverent kind people hold during a funeral. This was different, manufactured. The kind of silence that comes from people in expensive shoes, shifting uncomfortably across lacquered floors, waiting for someone else to speak first. It hovered in the air like a perfume too sweet to trust. I glanced around the boardroom, 12 chairs, 10 filled. Every one of them occupied by someone who owed their title to a merger I negotiated or a crisis I cleaned up. The windows behind them framed the skyline I helped build. Literally. I'd overseen the Keene Rail expansion, the Solara Tech acquisition, the 5-year deal with Midtown Holdings that kept this company solvent during the 2011 crash. You don't forget work like that. Not when it comes at the cost of 2 divorces, 3 ulcers, and a daughter who only texts you on holidays. And then, there she was. Tessa Grayson. She was half standing, leaning awkwardly over the conference table to adjust the lighting for a selfie. Said something about catching the vibe. I think she meant the sunrise bleeding over the skyscrapers. She didn't look up when she said it. Didn't look at me at all. We're pivoting to a more playful brand identity, she said, thumb tapping her phone screen. You know, agile, approachable, viral. Her voice lilted like she was asking a question, but no one answered. She finally turned and offered me a soft smile. Not warm, not cruel, just performative. Which is why we've decided your role is no longer aligned with the new direction. She didn't say fired. She said reimagined. And that's how it ended. 26 years. My name is Daniel Walsh. I'm 58 years old, and until about 4 minutes ago, I was Senior Vice President of Strategic Operations at Grayson Keene Holdings, billion-dollar infrastructure consulting and logistics firm based in San Francisco. Old money bones, new money makeup. I'd been with the company since 1997, back when Tessa was still learning fractions, and I was drafting energy maps with a pencil and a rotary phone. I didn't argue, didn't flinch, just reached for my briefcase, real leather, scuffed in the corners from actual travel, not an Etsy filter, and clicked it shut. Well, I said, thank you for the clarity. Tessa blinked. Maybe she expected a protest, maybe a pleading rant or a sad little exit speech. I gave her none of that. Just one slow nod and a look long enough to remind her she hadn't invented power. She'd inherited it. I turned toward the door, paused, then looked over my shoulder. Tell your father I said hello. The smile dropped for half a second. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I caught it. I always do. The hallway outside was colder than usual, or maybe I was. I walked past the marketing wing, where beanbags had replaced desks, and some intern with a nose ring was filming a TikTok about Tuesday wins. I passed HR, where fake plants lined every windowsill and the director's door was covered in rainbow post-its that said, "Radical transparency" and "Empathy is everything." No one looked at me. No one said a word. Outside, the fog was thinning. My Lexus sat alone in the executive lot. I slid into the driver's seat, pulled the door shut, and let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. It wasn't just the job. It was what the job covered. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a black laptop. No stickers, no branding, just matte steel and a biometric strip on the side. I pressed my thumb to the sensor. It scanned, unlocked. The screen flickered to life. No desktop, just a command prompt. I typed in one sentence. Code gray. External protocol now in play. The screen blinked. Then lines of encrypted code began crawling upward, like ants on caffeine. Tessa Grayson thought she'd ended something today. She had no idea what she'd started. The protocol was never meant to be used, just a failsafe, a contingency buried beneath 12 years of loyalty and silence. But the moment she said playful brand identity, with duck lips on her phone camera, while erasing a quarter-century of work. That was the moment the lock clicked. The screen split. 2 options: purge, extract. I hovered over the second. Clicked. Across 6 secure locations, from a storage unit in Fremont to a dead-drop hard drive in Portland. Files began syncing. Names, deals, maps, metadata, call logs. One folder alone contained a 7-figure trail of off-book payouts that passed through the same Dubai shell firm Tessa's new Creative Partner Incorporated 6 months ago. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just watched the system come alive. I had built Grayson Keene's empire with handshakes and war games. While they were painting walls pastel, I was negotiating with rail unions and blackmailing tech brokers who tried to undercut our bid in Paraguay. I didn't need approval. I needed leverage. And now, after 26 years of service, they handed me exactly that. She thought she'd fired a dinosaur. She didn't know she'd just woken one up. People like to say your resume tells your story. Mine doesn't. Mine lies. On paper, I was a corporate strategist, senior vice president of operations for a mid-cap infrastructure giant, efficient, analytical, risk-averse, the kind of guy who reads financial reports on flights and keeps a travel toothbrush in his breast pocket. I gave talks at supply chain conferences, sat on boring panels, shook hands with foreign ministers and airport commissioners and power grid engineers. I was the suit that showed up after the dust settled, handed everyone a PowerPoint, and told them what came next. But that was only the mask. The truth started 2 decades earlier. After September 11th, while everyone was chasing ghosts in caves, I was chasing wires. I joined a task force, off the books, buried under a joint directive between Treasury and the Bureau. Our job wasn't to kill terrorists. It was to bankrupt them, track their money, map the shell companies, identify which construction firms in Dubai were fake, which charity boards were laundering, and which telecom startups were funneling capital straight into the hands of men who wanted to watch the world burn. I didn't carry a gun. I carried algorithms. I spent 12 years embedded across financial institutions, logistics chains, and sovereign-funded infrastructure groups. I learned where money goes to hide, how trust gets weaponized, and what greed looks like when it wears a Navy suit and a Yale ring. By 2014, I was burned out. Couldn't sleep, couldn't sit in a room without scanning for exits. I told my handler I was done. She offered me a soft landing. Corporate monitoring, she said. Infrastructure oversight. Help us watch the ones who build the world. Grayson Keene was my longest post. Initially flagged for potential foreign entanglements. Nothing illegal, just too many golf games with oil execs and a sudden interest in East African ports. My job was to blend in, embed quietly, and observe. Within 3 years, I became more than embedded. I became integral. I built the Strategic Ops Division from scratch, negotiated the biggest military logistics contract the firm had ever touched, helped them pivot during the 2011 crisis when 3 of our largest revenue channels collapsed in a single quarter. They started calling me the fixer around the office. I didn't correct them, but I never stopped watching. I knew the day would come when someone, young, hungry, and reckless, would try to bend this machine into something it was never built to be. So I did what I always do when I see a future threat. I prepared. The shadow ledger wasn't easy. 7 layers of obfuscation, cross-continent data shunts, hardwired backups in jurisdictions with toothless privacy laws. It took 3 years to build and 10 minutes to trigger. Every off-ledger transaction flagged. Every late-night meeting, time-stamped. Every out-of-sync document version, archived in real time. And now here we were. The girl I once mentored, Tessa Grayson, was CEO. Newly minted, fresh off a birthday trip to Bali and a speaking engagement at a Women in Tech brunch, where she called herself a strategic empath. She fired me with a selfie smile and a sentence about playful brand vibes. I didn't react, but my systems did. Back at home, I pulled up the first batch of flagged anomalies. Payments routed through a third-party branding firm based in Vancouver with a parent company in Malta. That parent linked to a Cayman account, which traced to an LLC formed by a man named Rami Haddad. Publicly, he's an angel investor in climate tech. Privately, he's the man I saw pick her up in a matte gray G-Wagon last November outside the Ritz. She called him just a friend. Turns out that friend owns controlling interest in a Dubai-based entity that recently acquired exclusive license rights to Grayson Keen's logistics modeling software, the same software that underpins most of our defense-grade deployments. The paperwork was disguised as a low-risk test partnership, but the numbers told another story. Deep cuts to internal R&D, quiet transfers of core patents, a trademark request filed overseas under a dummy brand called Vibe Tech. They weren't just pivoting the brand, they were selling it. I leaned back from the screen and closed my eyes. The first time I met Tessa, she was 16. Her father brought her into the office to shadow me for a summer. She was bright, restless, asked sharp questions. I helped her apply for a science grant. I told her never to apologize for being smarter than the room. She made me promise I'd never lie to her. I didn't, but I should have told her how the world works. I should have told her that power doesn't just corrupt. It seduces. It flatters. It whispers in your ear that you deserve more than you've earned. And by the time you realize what it's taken from you, it's too late. The girl I mentored is gone. What's left is someone who smiled while handing over national security infrastructure to a man who thinks democracy is just a brand he hasn't invested in yet. I encrypted the files, dropped them into a cold packet, sent them to a contact I haven't used in 9 years. Old friend at the SEC. Doesn't answer Christmas cards, answers these. Then I made a second copy. This one's going to the press, if things go the way I expect. They say revenge is loud, screaming, rage, blood. They're wrong. The real thing? It's quiet, cold. It happens in the hours no one notices, between office lights shutting off and inboxes filling up, in the hum of secure servers, in the stillness of a man who knows exactly what he's about to do and how long it's going to take. I didn't throw a fit when Tessa fired me. I didn't storm out. I didn't raise my voice. I just left. Then I went home, made black coffee with no sugar, and opened a legal pad I hadn't touched in years. Not digital, not searchable, ink and paper, the old ways. I wrote down 3 names, underlined them. Then I picked up a burner phone I kept in a fireproof box under the guest bed. First call, a man named Russell Green. Technically, he's the Department of Defense liaison for contract certification audits, a role he pretends not to enjoy while sitting on a pension that triples his official salary. He picked up on the third ring. Hello? It's Norwood, I said. A pause. Then, Jesus, I thought you were dead. Not yet. I gave him the contract number. Project Limestone, classified Tier 2 tech infrastructure, reviewed for dual-use certification in 2019, cleared under my internal report. I flagged a compliance breach and told him to start pulling the satellite packet metadata from our recent distribution. He asked why. I told him to check image 43 in the rebrand press kit Grayson Keen had sent out that morning. Then I hung up. Second call, Miguel Chen, J.P. Morgan, Executive Director of Institutional Security. We met 15 years ago when he was green and I was paranoid. He owes me for what I covered in Jakarta. I called from a different burner, said nothing but the phrase, Vault 3 needs dusting. He paused, exhaled. You're cashing it in? Now. He didn't ask questions. He never did. He'd initiate a quiet audit of Grayson Keene's internal fund movements, specifically anything involving Malta, Dubai, or currency-to-crypto swaps that skipped standard holding periods. The kind of transfers that wouldn't trip alarms, but would light up red under compliance scrutiny if anyone bothered to look. Then came the third call. This one took me a moment. I sat on it, stared at the name, the number, my ex-wife's brother, Thomas. We hadn't spoken in 8 years, not since the funeral. He hated me for how I left her. Probably still does. But hate's funny. Sometimes it's cleaner than love, more reliable. He picked up, surprised. Dan? It's me. A beat. The hell do you want? I need your eyes. Quietly. He was a cybersecurity journalist now. Freelance, no corporate leash. He had reach, and he knew how to follow smoke. I'll pay you, I said. Through a third-party wallet. You'll find the trail either way, but I need you to find it faster. Silence. Then, this about Tessa? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He sighed. Send it. I uploaded the rebrand folder to a ghost drive. Everything she and her boyfriend had slapped together over the last week. New fonts, flashy motion graphics, slogans like "Build Bold" and "Engineered for Empathy." They'd even dropped a teaser ad. It ran across LinkedIn and Instagram. Gold filters, drone footage, a slow pan across one of our construction sites in Nevada, the one we used for DoD subcontract testing. In frame, at timestamp 022, half obscured by a crane, sat a prototype. Top secret, military grade, still in trial phase, and now accidentally publicly released to over 900,000 impressions. I didn't have to call Russell back. He called me. She just violated Section 5 of her own compliance agreement, he said. I know. She's cooked. Not yet, I replied, but she will be. I hung up and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered. The city moved the way it always did, restless, unaware. And me? I wasn't angry. I was careful. There's a difference. I'd spent most of my life invisible, the strategist, the fix-it man, the one who sat just outside the spotlight, pulling the strings, taking the calls no one else wanted to hear. I used to think that was enough, but now I wasn't so sure. Maybe this wasn't about justice. Maybe it wasn't even about stopping her. Maybe it was just about being seen. A voice inside me whispered what I'd tried not to admit. They already forgot you. This isn't revenge. It's resurrection. I walked to the cabinet and pulled the hard case from the back, pried it open, entered the passcode. The laptop booted. No icons. Just a prompt. I typed one word. Furnace. The screen went white. A loading bar appeared. Initialization. 3%. I sat back, watching it crawl. The next 48 hours were going to be very loud. Collapse has a sound. It's not screaming. It's not glass shattering or sirens in the distance. It's quieter than that. It's the way voices lower when the press leak hits at 4:32 a.m. It's the stammer of a PR director realizing they're not the first call. They're the story. It's the silence between pings as the SEC subpoenas land one by one in inboxes that used to ignore you. By 7 a.m., Grayson Keene was trending, not because of some viral campaign, but because half the financial sector was scrambling to decipher the classified export chart embedded in their now-pulled ad campaign. At 8:15, the Department of Defense froze every government contract tied to us. The headline hit Bloomberg at 9:02. Federal audit opens into Grayson Keene's military software licensing amid IP leak. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I'd been rehearsing this exact sequence for 12 years. not because I wanted it to happen, but because I knew it could. At 10:30 a.m., the board called an emergency meeting, the same board that nodded politely, while Tessa replaced the company's mission statement with radical agility. The same board that pretended not to notice when she promoted a man who thought dual use was a dance term. They sat in that room like men who had just realized they'd handed the keys to someone who never learned to drive. And her? I watched her through a grainy black and white feed, live surveillance I wired into the building years ago, under the excuse of vendor-side visual redundancy. Tessa Grayson stood at the head of the table, mascara bleeding into the corners of her eyes. Hair up, but loose. She wasn't in heels today. Sneakers. The kind of switch people make when they know they'll be pacing. She was yelling, pointing, blaming. "The old guard sandbagged this transition," she said. "There's a smear campaign happening. This reeks of internal sabotage." The CFO leaned back, arms crossed, unreadable. The head of compliance wouldn't meet her eyes. "I was told those files were reviewed," she snapped. "By whom?" someone asked. She didn't answer. She just turned and stared out the window, like that would somehow end the bleeding. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every breadcrumb had already been placed. The off-books IP transfers, the falsified Q4 filings, the LLC chain that led straight to her boyfriend's holding firm in Dubai. And the kill shot? An authorization form. Digitally signed, time-stamped, logged under her executive credentials. The recipient? A flagged distributor banned under U.S. arms export control. That single document guaranteed three things: criminal liability, contract disqualification, a federal investigation that would hollow her career from the inside out. And it all traced back to her. Not the board, not a rogue division. Her. I didn't watch much longer. I knew how it would play out. By noon, the stock had dropped 17%. Trading halted. Their phones were ringing off the hook, class action firms circling. A dozen reporters camped outside the lobby, one of them shouting questions about malicious corporate restructuring. Me? I was downtown, sitting in a quiet diner on 11th and Cole, the kind of place that still serves real eggs and doesn't ask for your email when you pay cash. I ordered black coffee and a plate of toast I didn't eat. Just sat in the corner booth, listening. 2 tables over, a man in a dress shirt tapped at his phone and said to his friend, "Wasn't this all under some old ops guy? Walsh? Didn't he run the entire strategy division?" His friend nodded. "Yeah, Dan Walsh. Guy was a ghost, but he made them rich." I didn't turn around. I just sipped my coffee. I didn't feel triumph. Not exactly. It wasn't gloating or vengeance. It was alignment. As if, for once, the world had turned the right way on its axis and made the sound it was always supposed to make. The bell above the door jingled. A woman came in. A man followed. More chatter. Someone mentioned government freeze orders. I glanced at the muted TV in the corner. CNBC ran a ticker. Grayson Keene was still in red. And then my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. East Coast prefix. They want you back. Name your terms. I stared at it. Let it breathe for a moment. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I turned off the screen. Slid the phone face down next to the napkin dispenser. Then I smiled. Collapse doesn't always end with an explosion. Sometimes it ends with someone like me sitting in a booth, finally invisible, while the rest of the world figures out what I've known all along. They should have never stopped listening. It felt like walking into a memory you thought had already died. Same boardroom, same skyline, same chairs. But the people in them, they weren't the same. They looked older, smaller, like someone had turned down the saturation on their ambition. Nobody shook my hand when I walked in. Nobody cracked a joke or offered a coffee. They just looked at me like I was gravity, heavy and inescapable. The room where I was fired felt colder than I remembered. The wall-mounted screens were still showing market data, red, bleeding. One of them had a ticker that kept flashing Grayson Keene under federal review. Another screen was frozen mid-presentation, a garish slide with the company's new short-lived slogan, "Build Bold." I didn't sit. I stood at the far end of the table and waited. There were 7 board members. Only 3 of them had been there the day I was let go. One couldn't meet my eye. One kept glancing at the door like he expected Tessa to walk in any minute and bail them out. The third, Harold Renner, CFO, was the only one who spoke. "We need help," he said, voice thin. I nodded once. "Where's Tessa?" "House arrest," he replied. "Pending federal indictment. SEC's coordinating with justice. She's not coming back." I already knew that, but I needed to hear them say it. They shuffled papers, whispered. Someone cleared their throat. Another reached for a glass of water and didn't drink. When the silence grew long enough to sting, Harold spoke again. "We'd like to bring you on in a consulting capacity, quietly, temporarily. Help us. Stabilize." I let that hang in the air. Then I stepped forward, placed a folder on the table, and opened it. Inside was a single page. No letterhead, no signature line. Just terms. Clean, sharp, surgical. "I'll return for 1 year," I said. "As chairman emeritus, I don't want day-to-day control, but I will have final approval on all directional decisions, hires, external contracts, and financial restructuring." One of them winced. Another spoke up. "That's steep." "It's survival," I replied, "and it's non-negotiable." I kept going. "I choose my successor, someone who knows what this company used to stand for and what it needs to become again. We pivot back to hard infrastructure, transportation, energy, freight logistics. No more campaigns, no more hashtags, no more disruption for the sake of disruption. You want to regain trust? You build things that work." They didn't argue, because they couldn't. I closed the folder. You can vote now, or you can wait and hope the SEC is feeling generous. Either way, I'll walk out of this building with the same calm I walked in. The vote was unanimous. It always is when fear outweighs ego. They gave me a badge, a temporary passcode, a keycard that still buzzed green when I passed it over the sensor on my old floor. I didn't speak as I rode the elevator up, just listened to the soft whir of it all, like the building was trying to remember who I was. My old office hadn't changed. Same desk, same scuffed corner, same window view of the bridge I once helped reroute freight lines around to save $37 million in annual costs. The chair still creaked the same way. The screens were dusty, and the desk phone was flashing a single red voicemail dot that had probably been there for months. But there was something else. A yellow sticky note on the corner of the monitor. Faded, curling slightly. "Thanks for believing in me." Initials in the corner, RG. "Rebecca, intern from 2 summers ago. Smart, nervous, spoke too fast, but sharp. I'd fought to get her into the analyst rotation program when others thought she was too green." I stared at the note longer than I meant to. Not because it surprised me, but because I'd forgotten how much that little line had meant at the time. A rare moment when something actually stuck. I didn't miss the title, or the money, or the status meetings that felt like theater. I missed this. The feeling that you were building something that mattered. That someone, somewhere, still gave a damn. I opened the drawer. My things were still there. A pen. A photo of my daughter, when she still talked to me. A half-filled notebook. I packed what mattered and left the rest. Then I took one last file out of my satchel. a hard copy of the $87 million client ledger from last year, the one that had kept the company's blood flowing while they were too busy chasing aesthetics. I placed it on the center of the desk, wrote one line in black ink across the top page: "Respect isn't a vibe, it's earned." No signature, no date, just truth. I turned off the lights, closed the door, walked the hallway without looking back. Not fired. Finished.